Anyone speaking today, including advisory team members, please identify yourself when you begin to speak. Staff will be doing additional roll calls if necessary to confirm attendance. So with that, this meeting is called to order, and I'll ask Mark Michaud to do a roll call.
Yes, thank you. Santiago Arzat. Allison Barta Bailey. Jessica Black.
Here.
Todd Booz. Gary Brooks. Andy Burnett. Ophelia Concio.
Present.
Nathan Kao. Jorge Charneco.
Present.
James Cooper. Scott Cravens. Joel Dixon.
Attending.
Jonathan Dodson. Clay Farah.
Here.
Chris Fleming.
Present.
Asa Highsmith.
Present.
Julie Hornbeek.
Present.
Andrew Wang. AJ Kirkpatrick.
Present.
Mark Livingston. David Lloyd. Ricardo Montoya.
Present.
Kenyon Morgan. Nikki Nice. Jim Parrick.
Here.
Emily Pomeroy.
I'm here.
Janice Powers.
I'm here.
Dima Ramadan. Todd Stone. Tim Strange. Bryce Thompson.
I'm here, present.
Marcus Uday. Mark Zitzow. Madam Chairman, I think it looks like we have 13 present.
Okay, thank you.
James Cooper's just being admitted.
Okay. All right, so the purpose of today's meeting is we wanted to focus on reviewing our public outreach strategy. So, the past many meetings have been about, first we did a lot of meetings about specific assigned code issues, and then we've gotten deeper into broader zoning issues the last meeting or two. But now we're going to take a break, switch gears, and talk about our proposed public outreach strategy. So I'm going to turn it over to our consultant, Mark White, who you have met at previous meetings. And he's also going to, he in turn is going to work with another one of the sub-consultants, Travis Pendleton, to talk through what we're proposing. And our main goal, as with all of these meetings, is to not just present to you information, but to get your sincere feedback on what we present. So I don't know that anybody on the call has actually met at Trevice, at least not in the same way that you've gotten to know Mark White, but she has been in attendance at all of our meetings, all of the stakeholder advisory team meetings, and in many of our internal meetings. She is a public involvement innovator. She works for Vireo, which is a women-owned business, public outreach consultant. She has a Master of Urban Planning from University of Kansas, a Bachelor of Architectural Studies also from University of Kansas. And her strengths are in developing and executing communications and planning processes through which stakeholders are brought together to discuss opportunities ahead of them, which is exactly what we need for this project. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mark White.
Thank you, Lisa. And I'm just going to say a few quick words before I turn this over to Trevice. I want everyone to know too that Trevice has also worked specifically on development code updates, which I found to be, one of the many reasons I wanted her part of this team. She's as Lisa said, a public outreach expert and a national expert on that. If you look at Planning Magazine and other publications, you will see her picture everywhere now. She's really good at what she does. But I also wanted somebody who knows some of the unique facets of public outreach when it gets to development codes, because codes are different than plans. Codes are the law. It usually brings out a different audience, often does, and there's a lot of really, as you already know, a lot of tough issues to work through. So we want to make sure we hear from people, get good feedback, because there's always a lot of back and forth when you put a zoning and development code together. And I just have a few. We just have a few slides to recap. The stakeholder advisory team's role and responsibilities. Lisa, I don't know if you want to say any words about it, but as we've said in most of our meetings, what we want from y'all and your value to this process is reviewing what we've done, acting as a sounding board, and at the end of the day, since a lot of you represent different interest groups or have good connections to interest groups around the city, let them know what's going on and promote awareness of this project. That's a big help to us. And this chart just shows you a little overview of where y'all fit in terms of the policy committee, which is members of the council and planning commission, our team, which and staff, which are doing a lot of the heavy duty drafting work and background analysis and that sort of thing. And we will have, and what Trevice is going to talk about today is a lot of the other stakeholder input that we're going to engage in as we move forward. So with that, I will turn this over to Trevice. And Trevice, you want to?
Mark, can I ask you a question?
Jump in.
Back to the previous slide and ask a quick question before we get started.
Certainly. This one?
Yeah, that one. Thank you. This is Jim Perry, by the way.
Okay.
Hasn't the public outreach already been done before it gets to our committee? My understanding of how this was going to work was all those folks on the left meet, talk, get input and everything. The documents get drafted. Our committee gives our feedback on the documents. Hasn't the outreach already been done?
Yeah, this is Jeff. So if we go back to the previous slide, the one your role, what we're doing right now is kind of the second bullet, acting as a sounding board. And if we go to the slide, the next slide that Jim was just talking about, this is more of a process. When we're putting together the actual documents, then yes, we do. This is kind of where you fit in the linear process. But what we're doing right now is we're coming to you as a sounding board saying, hey, this is what we're getting ready to do. So our last meeting, we said, hey, we gave you a bunch of information about the direction we're going. zoning in general, just kind of setting up the process. This is getting your feedback on the stakeholder input group before we actually engage in that. Then we're going to go and do all that stuff. Next time we meet, we'll come back with what you're talking about, Jim, where we say, all right, we've done all this work, and we have drafted some documents, and so we're ready for, we're going to tell you at that point, hey, here's what the here's what the public said, and here's what the focus group said, just like we did for the sign code. Here's what all these people said, and so knowing that, here's what we. And we don't have the agenda exactly for the next one. It's a ways out. But at that point, we will give you something more specific. So whether we come back to you, what exactly we come back to you with in the summer isn't quite clear yet, but it's going to be, it probably will be like a draft approach, I would imagine. So it won't be the actual code, because that's, hundreds of pages, and it's not going to call them all at once, but it'll be a segment that you can respond to, and probably some approaches, and so that's kind of the process. So there will be a bit of a hiatus between now and then, because now is kind of the sounding board. Hey, we want to tell you what we're going to do with stakeholder input. We want to get your feedback on, hey, what are we missing? What do you all think is most effective before we jump into this? Because a lot of you all have been through this, city processes a time or two. We want to make sure that we're talking to everybody we should be talking to. And so that's kind of where we're at today.
Okay. Jim, does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. I just thought that all the upfront work had been done before we got to the point of meeting. I didn't think that what we're doing now is really part of what our group was doing. So.
Okay. All right. With that, I appreciate it, Jim. Thanks for the question. And with that, I'll turn it over to Travis.
Thanks, Mark. Hi, everyone. What's on slide right now is just our approach and our process for the community engagement part. And when you look at it, you're going to see that the stakeholder team appears in there. So this is a little bit more detailed than what was on the previous slide. Essentially, what you're going to see is we have 4 areas that we're doing outreach and engagement for during this process. We have an input portion, which is going to be a lot of what we focus on this year. That will help us develop draft materials, and they'll cover different topics. We'll review those. We'll have public comment in a formal process, and then we'll do adoption in a formal process. Now, focusing on the left-hand side of the screen, you see the input section, and you're going to see that there's a geometric figure in there that says code, and there's different circles outside of that. And you see that the stakeholder advisory team is part of that in terms of getting input from you all. There's going to be a need to have focus group conversations during this time. So we're going to allocate some time for that. There's a policy committee. We'll talk with them. We'll talk with industry representatives, as we know that they are part of shaping the built environment. They build the buildings and so on. And so we want to be sure that we talk with them. And most importantly, there's also the general public, all the people that don't necessarily specialize in built environment and zoning and what the process is, but they live in those spaces. They know what it feels like. And we want to be sure that we hear from them as well. And that's a lot of people to engage over the next several months. Moving from just input to what do we do with that? We create, as we've already mentioned, draft materials and content that can be reviewed, and doing that with you, going into that review phase. So now I'm in that second section of the graph. Again, we're still talking about the code. We want to share those drafts with not only you, but the public, industry, and the policy committee. And from that, go into the more formal process, and you see that there are no more stakeholder advisory committee meetings when we get to that point. And then we get into the adoption process. And you all know that public comment and the adoption process, there's always time for public testimony, et cetera, because at that point you've got city council meetings and you have planning commission meetings. And I see in the chat, Ace is asking, is there a set of specific groups for each category? And so we are developing that, and I'll get into a little bit of that as we go forward. So with that, Mark, I want to go to the next slide. And so this is all about reaching as many people as possible. We have lots of categories of people. And so with any outreach and engagement effort, what we always develop is a really robust list of contacts. And so we are in the process of refining our list to make sure that we can have contact information for as many people as we can across Oklahoma City that fit into these categories and reaching them in a variety of different ways. So you can see there we have property owners and residents, but we also have, you know, traditional business groups, neighborhood groups, developers, the construction industry, officials and department staff. There are advocacy groups because there are key topics that are going to be important to Oklahoma City now and in the future, such as health and transportation. How do you engage younger people? What about our faith-based institutions? Those are all really important, and many, many others. So in terms of who we're trying to reach, this is our initial list, but no list that we come up with as a small group of staff and consultants based on all of our experience is ever going to be complete without asking more people, such as you all, who else we should include. And so that's the next question that we want to ask you all. Mark, would you go to the next slide?
Sure.
So what's really important is that we find out from you all who else we should engage. And so if you're looking on screen there, you see at the very top, it says respond at pollev.com/MarkWhite215. You can also, if you have internet access on your phone, you can go there. I can't copy this, but Mark, can you type this into the chat or get the link from online and drop it into the chat? People can click on it if they want to do that. You can also text Mark White 215 to the number 22333, which is on screen, and then indicate to us who else should be engaged during this process. When you do that via the link that you see at the top, if you type that into your phone or the other device that you're using, or you text Mark, your responses will start to show up on screen. And just now, Mark has put the link in the chat.
It's actually I've got the full screen up, so my chat function I can't find, but I can tell you it's pollev.com, then it's /MarkWhite215. So if you type that into your browser, it should get you there. Or if you text 22333 and then type in MarkWhite215, that's another way to access the poll. Those are the two different ways.
Also, the hyperlink part of it's missing, Mark. So I just redropped it in the chat with a clickable link that turned blue, you all. So it's blue like you normally see a hyperlink. I just dropped that in there. You can click that and it'll take you there. You can also, if it's easier for you, you can just use your Zoom chat box and send your responses that way too. But we're really interested in knowing, are we missing some other groups? Are there groups that come to mind that you want to be sure that we reach out to?
Mark, could you back up to the slide that lists all the groups again, just to make sure everybody can see it? And we went through it pretty quickly.
Certainly.
Also, I'm on the poll page, but it says it's waiting for your presentation to begin, Mark. There we go.
Okay.
Now it's working.
All right, very good.
Okay, so I see transit riders.
Mark, could you go back to the slide that shows the people that are being engaged already?
Okay. Can everybody see that?
Thank you.
You bet. So we're seeing transit riders, downtown ULI, which is Urban Land Institute, schools, small scale developers,
And I would ask also, like, if you guys have specific people in mind, feel free to put those in there too, or in the chat, because like, small scale developers, for example, is a great one that, you know, we of course know a bunch of them, but if you all have specific people in mind, we'd love to know. So we make sure that they're included.
Mhm. I see school districts on there and people in what's called active transportation, which means bicycling and walking. But active transportation also touches the transit riders. So, and that gets to multimodal transportation and the look and feel of streets and how that relates to neighborhood character, things like that. It's really important. I see downtown. In the chat from James, I see historic commercial districts, different chambers, right OKC. And the school districts are in there. See homeowners associations in there. Under architecture, are you all thinking special review? Or are you thinking architecture firms? Please unmute if you are someone who wrote architecture. I also see engineers. I'm assuming you mean the firms, or at least the umbrella organizations where you can reach those groups, like American Institute of Architects or your local APWA chapter.
Yeah, we often have conversations with engineers involved in putting applications together. They're usually extremely familiar with the codes and how they work and how the process works and et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody typed in IQC. Is that the Institute for Quality Communities? Is that the
Yeah, that's it.
outfit out of University of Oklahoma? Okay.
Yep.
And Shane Hampton is the executive director. That's why he's coming up there. As a
Okay.
person.
I see in the chat, Katie has, Oklahoma City Foundation for Architecture. We're supposed to have in there. Oh, I see PTAs. And I see minority groups. And what else? The managers component. Can someone elaborate on what is meant by managers? You mean like building? Can you unmute and share what you're thinking there?
I think one of them might have been district managers and it split up the two words.
Okay. I'm just going to add that here in the chat so I can remember that. Okay.
All right.
Yep, and we've got nonprofits. Is there anything else that we might be missing that's not on here, either in the chat, and you all can see the chat, or on screen? Not seeing a lot more.
Yeah, it looks like some people are still entering things because it's rearranging.
In terms of character, commercial, I think you're talking about commercial real estate, commercial developers. We've got NACTO in there. Oh, I see AIA Foundation and their foundation. I imagine there's probably a NSBE chapter in Oklahoma City, which is the National Society of Black Engineers. I see civil. Clay's added Commercial Developers Association in the chat. There's urban designers. Anything else?
That's a great list. Appreciate it.
Very, very good.
Does anybody else need more time to type anything in? If not, I'll lock that up and we'll move on to the next slide. But thanks everybody. That's a terrific list.
Mark.
It's really helpful.
if
Yes,
ideas-
Janice?
If ideas come to us later, I assume we're welcome to contribute those.
I'm sorry?
Definitely. Yes.
Yes,
I said, if ideas come to us later. I assume
absolutely.
Mhm.
we can
Okay,
contribute
thank
those.
you. By the way, that's what my brain looks like when it's 3 in the morning and I'm writing a zoning code. So interesting. So anyway, thanks everybody. That's a terrific list there. And I will try to figure out how to advance the slide from here. I think, there we go. All right.
Good job, Mark. High five.
Thank you.
Mhm. Okay, so we've got all of those stakeholders. Now we also want to talk about how to engage and reach them. And so we think about different strategies for doing that, and then we tie those strategies to tools. So thinking about how to tackle something, our strategies involve developing messaging that introduces this project to the broader community. We know that you all are kind of a special group in that you're having your stakeholder advisory team meeting. Some of you, I think the majority of you, were part of the sign code conversation. So you already know what this project is about. We need to be sure that the broader community understands what it is, and that's where messaging comes in. We also want to be sure that as part of reaching out and getting feedback that we share information. And the key things to share are what's this project about? What are its purpose and goals? What's the schedule? How can I be involved? And why does zoning matter? I think you all know what zoning is for the most part. What I found working in other communities, be it for zoning projects or planning projects, people tend to not really know what zoning is. And so we need to explain what that is and why you should care about that. And then how to comment and provide a lot of different ways to do that. In terms of another strategy, we all know that's why we have these SAT meetings on Zoom, is we have a pandemic, vaccinations are coming out, et cetera, and there's different views on safety for people. We want to be sure that we have a combination of strategies to provide engagement. We want those to be virtual and then safe in-person activities when that's appropriate. And through it all, make sure that we have really meaningful engagement and communication. So when we're doing engagement, there wouldn't be anything where we're just meeting to have a meeting. Everything's got a purpose. We have information that we want to gather from people. We have information that we want to share so that we can develop those drafts of materials and those approaches that you all are very interested in seeing. Let's go to the next slide. Something that's been really, really important, and I think Oklahoma City is super amazing in that it's like a region inside of a city. So you go from rural to really dense downtown. And the way that you all have been describing that is that it's their land use typology areas, and that goes back to Plan OKC. So what we want to do is engage based on that character. So we want to engage the rural areas and talk about their issues all the way down to the most urban. And so you guys know what the land looks like. And so we've got those different development typologies in terms of their look and feel. And you can see when you look at that, there have got to be different issues. And so we want to be sure that we tailor our engagement and conversation to those locations like that. That also means, though, that what are we talking about? The same way that you have different land use typologies, and the map on the right is just the flat version of it, the plan view version of it, the overhead version of it that you see out of Plan OKC. That's just a screenshot from what's in your document right now. What we want to talk about, though, are what are your issues? What are the opportunities that come to mind when you think about the built environment, when you think about development, that we can talk about that will inform what the code update has in it as it relates to not only signs, but districts and the other elements of a development code. And we want to be sure that everything that we learn gets incorporated into the initial draft that everyone is able to see later in the process. And that's important because as you spend time in meetings, and we ask the broader community to do that, when you share your feedback with someone, you want to see how it's reflected or how it's used. Again, we're not meeting for meeting. So we want to demonstrate how that's being used. If people have certain ideas about strategies, we want to be able to talk about how we've applied them, if they're appropriate, if they're not, et cetera, what we've done with their feedback, and then how that relates to an initial draft of the plan. Let's go to the next slide. Those were some of the strategies. Now we get to the tools. Essentially, when you're talking about outreach and engagement, what you're talking about are two things. You're broadcasting information out through a variety of ways, which is why that contact list is really important, and a categorized contact list is important. And then you're discussing and commenting. And in OKC, we're talking about by Luda. So for broadcasting, we've got our contact list. That's usually the key to every engagement, outreach, or communications effort is who are you talking to? And then there are the ways that you do that. And so often you're talking about which channels you can use or which you can reach. So the news media generally reaches the broader public. So we develop press releases that communicate our messaging, what's happening, and we send those to them. But Oklahoma City also uses bill inserts, so we put content on that. And I think that's already happened one time, just in terms of letting people know that you can sign up to be on the contact list. There is social media, there is email marketing, there is story mapping. And in case you don't know what story mapping is when you take a project and you actually tie it to geography and you put it into a digital space and let people click around on that. And so in that case, we could have a map of Oklahoma City, and maybe we are taking the feedback that we get about issues and opportunities and strategies, and we start to map that in certain locations, probably by Luda. And that becomes a web-based information that people can click on and explore as we go through the process. That's an idea of a tool that we can use for broadcasting what we're doing. But there are others, and we're interested in knowing from you all in a bit what other tools come to mind. So once you're broadcasting, then it's what are you talking about and how are you talking about that? And so as I mentioned before, we have a pandemic, but just because there's a pandemic doesn't mean that everything has to be virtual the whole time. What it does mean, though, is that people have created habits. If you don't know this, it takes about 260 some odd days to create a habit. We have been in a pandemic for over a year. And so virtual is going to be a part of engagement, not just in Oklahoma City, I would say, but across the country in terms of our habits, what we're used to. So we have a lot of virtual focus groups, public meetings, opinion surveys. Those could be online. The same thing can be printed. We can do displays of our information and put them in publicly accessible spaces like City Hall, libraries, schools, community centers, and pair those with commenting options that people can fill out while they're visiting those spaces and then drop back off so that we can get that feedback. There are other ways of having discussions and commenting. I know a lot of communities are going to be looking at how you do hybrid meetings, which is you're doing something right now, but you also have an in-person version of it going. There's lots of different things that can go on. But for this project, we're focusing again on how to broadcast out what's happening and then how to have meaningful conversations about that and being as inclusive and robust in our approach as possible because we need to talk to as many people as possible. And so with that, there are other things. So there's city newsletter, there are topics that you can express interest in, you can subscribe, and that's via Lisa, which is on screen. Let's go to the next. Go ahead.
I inserted this to point out if people haven't seen it, anytime you go to the OKC.gov website now, you'll get a pop-up confirming if you want to subscribe to various news channels and information channels. So I wanted to point out to everybody that if you have not experienced that, you will, and that the code update project is one of the channels people can select via that process. And that is new. That just got rolled out in December or January by our public information office.
Mm-hmm.
All righty, thank you.
Other things that are related to that, I would point your attention to, if you haven't bookmarked this already, on the far right, it's got okc.gov/code update. That's the webpage where all the content is. If y'all have been looking for previous meeting notes, for example, from our SAT meetings, they're all online at that site. You can also sign up if you're not already, but I think you guys all are because you're on the SAT. You can tell others that they can sign up for updates to know what's happening as we have more meetings, as we put out summaries, all those things. And then social media is a big part of any outreach and engagement effort. And so we're going to be using our code OKC hashtag. on all of our social. It's also a way if you use hashtags to follow what's happening on a project on social media, because everything will have that on it. You want to go to the next slide?
Certainly.
And because then I want, okay. So we want to ask you all in the same way that we had before, what other strategies should we be considering? But I also want to address Asa's comment in the chat, which is if we're discussing and commenting by LUDA, what's the overarching framework that is consistent from LUDA to LUDA? Or could each end up radically different based on conversation? And I think there are things that could be different. The framework is to focus on issues and opportunities in each one of those LUDAs. So we'll have a sort of a standard set of questions that we want to ask community members that fall into that LUDA. So we'll have a framework in that way. Now, obviously their responses could be different. It's up to us to begin to pull together where the commonalities are in those conversations, what's different about them. We're also going to be developing a list of what we would have in our minds with experience with the code from staff and others. What are some of the issues to help start those conversations? So I expect there will be some differences, but in most things, there's a common thread that runs through things. So we should be able to find that out. But the initial framework for all those conversations will be similar.
Very good. Thank you. So just so everybody knows, this particular slide, you can only respond to through the browser. So if you take your browser, the text doesn't work on these kinds of slides. So if you go to pollev, pollev.com/markwhite215, that should take you to this question, and the screen should start to populate.
And Mark, it's the same link as
Correct.
before.
Yes, it should be.
If you've missed that, I'll just copy it again and put it in the chat. It'll have a hyperlink in it. You can click that in case you've gone away from the page.
And Mark, we're still waiting for your presentation to begin.
Okay. Let me.
And if you're adding anything to the previous question, I'm seeing that in the chat. And so we'll be sure and add that, and we will copy out and save all the feedback that we get out of the chat. So this question, like the others, if you want to put it in your response in the Zoom chat, you can do that as well.
Okay, so it should be activated now, and I see we already have some.
The mayor has a Twitter
responses.
account.
All right.
Use that.
And I neglected to mention, if you have two words, if you separate them by a hyphen, they should stick together.
Is
Somebody
OKC Talk, that's radio, isn't it? Is that radio?
It's a website, actually.
Website, okay.
And social media. And Mark, it popped up and then it shut down on me, and now I'm back to waiting for the presentation to begin.
Oh, goodness. Let's see. Does it work now?
Now it's back up, yes.
Very good. I just have to go back a slide and then advance, it looks like.
This is
Go ahead.
Janice Powers, and it will come as no surprise to anybody who knows me that I'm hopelessly techno-challenged. I would like to say that during the plan process, we did something called a meeting in a box. And somebody, probably Jeff Butler, would be the better person to explain really what that was, but it allowed small groups to sort of self-direct a meeting and gather input. And I think it was really pretty well received and well used, and that staff found it helpful. You can ask them about that. And the other thing I would like to say is during in the many years leading up to the Plan OKC rewrite, we used to have regional meetings within the city. There's a Southwest sector plan, a Southeast sector plan. And those were also very well attended and very well received. I like the idea of the LUDA based rather than just sector based, because I think it is sort of more tailored to actually reach into areas that have commonality of issues and would be seeking, commonality of a solution. So I really do like that idea.
Good.
Thanks, Janet. I've got it in the chat, what you've been saying, because I'm just going to grab the content out of the chat. So I added your meeting in the box and the regional sector meeting.
Awesome. So those sectors
Thank
are a
you
much
for
larger
your
area.
patience
than
and
the
help.
loose.
No problem.
No problem.
Well, we have lots of feedback, boots on the ground, reconnaissance, walk through the neighborhoods, walk the neighborhoods. I always call that canvassing. It's really fun and very meaningful when you get people that will chat with you. YouTube is really good. I see that. I see a visual neighborhood presence. Can someone elaborate on that? Visual neighborhood presence. I see survey in there too. More walking. I see more door to door. So more one-on-one type of engagement.
I think visual and neighborhood presence are two separate, because I wrote in neighborhood presence.
Okay.
There was no visual.
Okay.
Are there any specific events that are big where you think there may be a lot of people present that would be willing to hear about zoning or talk about zoning?
Mark, I was going to say this too. During the first few years that I was on the planning commission, I made it a practice to go to the annual meetings of the neighborhood associations that were formed and had that kind of event. And I would just ask for a little bit of time. And really, I was just there to listen to whatever it was. At annual meetings, you generally hear sort of what's on the collective plate of the neighborhood and what they think are problems and what they have in terms of aspirations for their neighborhood. And I found that just enormously helpful and educational. I mean, it basically the entire year to make the circuit because they all meet at different times and so on. A lot of pancake breakfasts and chili suppers and that kind of stuff. But they were always very, open and willing to hear a few words. Whether they would want to hear, a big presentation or not, I don't know. But if we gave them a little heads up and some time, that's probably the most well attended and advertised event in most neighborhoods. I wouldn't say our neighborhood. I'd say that's probably either the Easter egg hunt or the 4th of July. But it's the meeting where people come to sort of talk about the business aspects of the neighborhood and what needs to be done. So you might give that some thought.
Okay, thank you.
I added that in the chat, Janice, and when you were talking about that, it made me think of this. Because lots of communities that have active, organized neighborhood groups have those types of meetings, but we could probably do a short pop-in presentation. I mean, like when they give you 5 minutes on the agenda, 10 minutes max, and then do a drop-off for that. And that drop-off could be the meeting in the box, for example. And so then they could do a follow-up conversation if they wanted to do that. So
I think that's a great idea.
I popped that in the chat. I also see in the chat that Katie's added the Arts Festival in June. Downtown draws a lot of people. Jessica's added open streets. I would love to hear some more about that, open streets. And also in the chat, there is a tool about some type of useful tool from ASA saying this is to reach out to renters as well. Don't know what that might be besides doing door to door. And I know sometimes it's really hard to reach out to renters. And so canvassing has often been the approach. I see talk shows on here as well.
Talking about the Arts Festival makes me realize, there are so many really pretty well attended festivals throughout the city. Whether they'll all be up and running this year, I don't know. But I mean, if we had just a standard sort of booth, if you will, to go to some of there's one on the Paseo, there's one out at Oklahoma City Community College, the sort of arts festival kind of things. But there are others as well. I know there's one in Capitol Hill. That might be a wonderful thing just to have, to plan to have someone there at each of them, if we can do that.
Certainly.
But I usually call that a pop-up. There's pop-ups and drop-bys, right? You pop up at an event, you drop by an event. Pop-up means you have your table and you've got your tablecloth, you have your things, you're usually trying to get feedback. There are there's a lot more involved with that, but it's really great. And you do it at an event where people are going to be, so you can talk with them.
So somebody had CREC panels. What does anybody know what? Can somebody explain what CREC means?
It's the Commercial Real Estate Council. It's a local real estate group.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay. So they have regular meetings?
They do.
They do, and we've presented several times to them, and I think that would be great. And we could take meeting in a box wherever we go. They probably would appreciate that as well.
Okay.
Do we do things like Chamber of Commerce and Rotary meetings and things like that?
When we did Plan OKC, we did a kind of a speaking tour where we gave presentations to whoever was willing, and there were a lot groups like that. We did go and talk to, I remember the South Chamber is one I did, and a few other chambers. So yeah.
Okay. And somebody put a Nuestra on there. Is that an event, or is there more information on that one?
In the chat, there's also, in terms of events, OKC Pride downtown this summer. And there's another one, OKC Pride in October on 39th Street. You could go to. Kristen's interested, would be happy to help with outreach for downtown OKC at their meetings and events. And then James just dropped the link for OKC Pride, so we can get more information there. See, farmers markets. Is the farmers market at Scissortail Park? All that's all together. Is that where it's at?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. I didn't hear anything about Nuestra. Is that an event? That usually means hour, but
I think there's some churches that at least have that in their name. So I don't know, maybe it refers to maybe using that as a forum or something. I'm sorry, with some.
I think Nuestra is a local community organization. I'm not the person who posted that, so I could be speaking incorrectly, but a quick Google search came up with what appears to be a community organization.
Okay.
There's I'm putting a link. It looks like it's for Oklahoma with Armando Rubio.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Oh, I see. They have a Facebook page. Oh, I see. Good feedback. We have 7 more minutes left in the meeting. Want to be respectful of your time. I know there are a couple more slides that we have to go.
Okay. So if I'll go ahead and move on to the next slide then, and just lock this up. All right. So any more discussion on the tools you heard about or what's been brought up?
Well, it won't come as any surprise to anybody, I'm sure, that I feel like this is such an important piece of this process. And I'm thrilled to have you all on board to be working at it. I mean, it obviously about 10 seconds into it, you exceeded my expertise level. So the things that have worked in the past are great. I'm all in favor of trying every new thing we can think of. And it's lovely to have people on board who actually have some experience to know what works well and what hasn't worked so well. I'm all in favor of try everything, it's an all of the above for me, so.
Absolutely. Thanks, Janice. Anyone else? Any other comments or questions? Lisa, do you need to call for public comment?
Yes, I want
Or
to.
is the consultant allowed to do that?
You can, anybody can. Yeah, we always include this because I want to make it clear to non-SAT members that they're welcome to make any comment. So if you would like to do so, please unmute yourself, identify yourself, and tell us anything you would like to say. Okay, it looks like we don't have any takers on that.
All right. And next steps?
Next steps. Yeah, we remind everybody every time, and I did specifically last time, that, as thoughts come into your head on public outreach, suggestions, or anything about the code update, make a note of it. You can make a note of it online. You can tell other people in your network to make comments online also. I sent a poll, SurveyMonkey poll earlier this week, asking for everyone's comfort level in an in-person meeting starting at the end of May or first part of June. And I don't have the latest batch of responses, but the trend was heavily in favor of meeting in person. And part of the timeline for that was driven by the availability of vaccines. As you have seen from my recent emails, the SAT members and their families are eligible to receive their vaccines under the city's POD. So by the first part of June, it looks like everybody would have the opportunity to have been fully vaccinated. So we are proceeding with planning that. Many people have commented throughout the process. On one hand, Zoom has been very convenient and obviously very safe. Convenient in terms of travel time and logistics, but probably a little inhibiting on the interaction. And as we get into these meatier topics of how the new zoning code would be structured, that face-to-face time just seems so critical. So as Jeff mentioned earlier, the next SAT meeting would be the first part of June at the earliest. I will let everybody know a date as soon as possible so that they can hold it and make plans for it. Any questions about the next meeting?
Lisa, this is Joel Dixon.
Yes.
Just curious. So some of us might have summer plans, like myself, where we'll be out of town, but may still have the opportunity to attend, remotely or virtually, if that's an option. So I'm hoping that if we do move to in-person meetings, there will still be some kind of hybrid option or something along those lines that would allow those of us who may not be physically present within the city to attend, but may still want to, be a part of the meeting and provide feedback and listen and hear things of that nature.
Sure. Yes, we can look at ways to keep everybody included. Homework. I don't remember if we had a specific homework for this meeting going forward, but we did want to get everyone at least alerted to the idea that homework would be coming. We did have some homework for you before the last meeting, and that was to review the code diagnosis. But we're going to try to get in the habit of doing that more regularly so that we can maximize our time in the meeting with discussion.
Yeah, and we've had good success with that in our Bike Walk OKC project so far, and hopefully that has helped you prepare for these meetings. And I think, like Lisa said, as we get into the meet later this summer and this fall, you know, we'll just kind of give you the homework and the materials to prepare, and then that way we can reduce the amount of time we spend during the meetings doing kind of you know, presentations and stuff, and just focus on discussion and getting input. So you'll probably be seeing something from us, a package of homework well in advance of the next meeting.
Okay.
Yeah, so just a quick recap. I meant to intro this at the beginning of the meeting. You know, so the whole point of the meeting was to review our public outreach strategy, get your feedback. I think we've gotten some fantastic feedback. So it's exactly what staff needed to move forward.
All right.
So yeah, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mark and Travis. Did you have any parting comments, Mark or Travis?
No, you all did
Nope.
great. Giving new feedback and having new ideas that we can incorporate. High five.
Well, everyone have a good
Ditto.
Easter weekend, and we'll see you in a few months.
Very good. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Mark.
Yes.
Janice Powers. I just wanted to double check. All the slides from today, including the lists that we created, will be available online.
I think I'm
Yes.
going to say yes. I'm going to save the PowerPoint with the comments that were made. And Lisa, I suppose you could make those available online, or we could, you know, send a link to the members or put it on Teams or something.
Yes, if you send me a link, I can post them. The meeting's recorded, so it'll also
Okay, great.
Results that showed up, but we can compile everything into a document to record it.
Great. Thank you.
Very
Thank
good.
you.
Thank you, Janice.
Okay.
All right. Y'all take care.
You.